Okay, APUSH classes, we are now coming out of the Ice-mageddon from the past week, and we're going to try to start catching back up on some notes. So today is Friday, January 19th, 2018. This is going to be video 1 for Unit 8. We're going to be picking up somewhere down here. I can't remember exactly where we all stopped. I know it was like recognition of U.S. power, new territory protectorate. I think y'all got pretty much the same spot, but we might do a little bit of backtracking to make sure we're all good on the notes here. So let me just read through it pretty quickly. So we're going to start with recognition of U.S. power. I think that's where we all stopped. One positive outcome was the recognition of U.S. power abroad, meaning imperialism, with all this new expansion and so forth, that we now recognize as a stronger power abroad. Victory filled the U.S. with more national pride. Southerners shared the pride and became more attached to the Union. Britain, France, and other European countries recognized the U.S. as a first-class power with a strong navy and willingness to take a more active international role. And I'm sorry I'm reading this kind of quickly, but I think y'all got this. I just wanted to say it one more time just in case. So America does obviously get new territory as a result of the Spanish-American War. We got Puerto Rico and Guam, straightforwardly. We conquered those two territories. We also got the Philippines. We bought the Philippines. But Cuba was not was not a territory. We refer to that as protectorate. Protectorate is where you essentially dominate a weaker country, their policies, and have oversight over them, but you don't own them. So Cuba is going to become our first protectorate. We're going to see other ones later on, but a protectorate is where you do not own the territory. It's not a territory. It's where you have a lot of influence over a territory or a country, but you don't own them. So Cuba would be our first protectorate, and that's due to the Platt Amendment that we passed with their constitution. So that's where we're leaving from there. We should be going to the next slide from there. We already saw that. So now we're at new slide for everybody. This is going to be after the Spanish-American War foreign policy. Still McKinley, though. We're still dealing with McKinley, 1899, 1900. So McKinley's Secretary of State, John Hay, was almost alarmed by China following under the influence of foreign powers. So kind of the big idea behind doing all this expansion was to try to get closer to Chinese markets. All these various islands like Hawaii and the Philippines and Guam and so forth. So by the time we end up getting to try to open up a more steady regular trade with China by 1899, once the war concludes, we find that China has fallen under various foreign influences, essentially. The Chinese, I don't think I have a map. Let me see if I have a map of this. No, I don't. Okay. So anyway, basically, China was very weak at this point. China's not like it is now. It was kind of stuck in the past. It had not really done any industrialization like Europeans and Americans had. So when Europeans show up in the late 1800s, China gets tossed around a little bit, bullied by Europeans because there's nothing they can do. It's just not technologically as advanced as foreigners had been, and they kept themselves very isolated. Plus, they had a very weak imperial system. They just were not in good shape. Anyway, so our Secretary of State, John Hay, H-A-Y, wanted to open up trade with China. But unfortunately, you had these spheres of influence established. So the spheres of influence is where a country could dominate trade and investment and shut out competitors. So a sphere of influence is where a country could dominate trade and investment and shut out competitors. Basically, what this means is that in every Chinese port, some foreign power occupied it. So the five powers that occupied the coastline would have been Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. So every single port was controlled by one of those five powers. Now, they didn't own China, like they had not conquered China, but basically they come in, seized control of those various ports, and there was nothing no one else could trade there. Basically, if it was a German-run port, only German ships could trade there. If it was a Japanese-run port, only Japanese ships could trade there. So all Chinese ports were occupied by one of those five powers, and so you had those five spheres of influence where America could not trade at all. So America didn't want to get left behind, as we had talked about before. We want to be part of the international trade system and so forth. John sent a series of open notes to all these different nations, hence the name Open Door Policy, or it's also called the Open Notes Policy. So in 1899, John Hay sends these open notes to suggest an open door policy. Basically, the suggestion was, how about you maintain control of your ports, but all countries would have equal access and trading rights to everybody else's ports, meaning that if a Japanese ship wanted to trade with a Russian port in China, fine. If a Russian ship wanted to trade with a British port in China, fine. Or let's say if an American ship wanted to trade with any of those ports, fine. That basically they would still maintain control of the ports, which means they would still control like taxes and those kind of things, but any ship could trade at any port. And so basically, he sent those notes out. No one responded. So none of the 5 countries ever said yes or no. So he took that as meaning, okay, let's go ahead and do it. No one said no, so let's go ahead and make that the case. So that's what began the open door policy. 1899, the open door policy began with China, to where American ships could trade in China in any of those ports, because none of them refused our ships arriving. So we never had a sphere of influence in China, but we definitely had open trade. So we were able to trade from the Philippines into China with no problem. The press hailed Hay for and McKinley for the open door policy. He later pledged that the U.S. would also help maintain China's territory and integrity. So we would kind of act as somewhat of a protector for China as well too. You can see some cartoons here, like here's China, this wall of China. Uncle Sam has the key here in the middle. He's like basically the gateway into all of China with all these other foreigners. Same thing up here. Uncle Sam is issuing this decree with all these other foreigners around them, figuring out how to best divvy up China in general. So that's what you see happening there. All right, so then, but not all the Chinese people were happy with this. Basically, people were asked, except for the Chinese, about this policy. And there were various Chinese nationalists who wanted to get rid of all foreign influence. One of the famous groups of nationalists in China were called the Boxers. We call them Boxers. The Europeans call them Boxers because they did martial arts. The real name of this society was the Harmonious Society of the Righteous Fist, because yes, they did do martial arts, but they were also people who wanted to remove all foreign influence. And so in 1900, nationalism and xenophobia were on the rise in China. This secret society formed, the Boxers. They decided to attack all foreign settlements and basically try to drive out all foreign influence. So every single port in China was attacked by these nationalists, the Boxers, where they tried to force everyone to leave. They did kill various people. They killed missionaries. They also killed Christian Chinese converts. So Chinese people who had converted to Christianity, they were killed as well. That way, all foreign influence would be evacuated. So of course, obviously, we're all going to leave, go home, and say, okay, China, you can have your country back, right? Right? No, wrong. So instead, America and those 5 other countries, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan, form a coalition force of a few thousand soldiers, and we show up and we put down the Boxer Rebellion. So in 1900, our 6 countries, together with this coalition force, go in and put down all these various Boxers and crush the rebellion. And then China was actually forced to pay all these countries indemnities, which means basically they were forced to pay for the damages they caused, and the open door policy remained. So even though they try to remove us, the open door policy remained for the next about 40-something years until the whole communist takeover thing happened later down the road. So the Boxer Rebellion was unsuccessful. But what's kind of funny, too, is that all those countries that fought together will actually, again, fight each other about 15 years from now in the World War I. Okay, so that's basically the end of McKinley's foreign policies. McKinley will die in 1901, not long after the whole Boxer Rebellion thing comes to conclusion, which now brings us to Theodore Roosevelt. So we're actually going to do Theodore Roosevelt a little differently. We're going to do his foreign policy first here, and then later in the unit, when we come back to progressivism, we're going to do his domestic policy. So we're only addressing his foreign policy now, but he does have a pretty hefty domestic policy too. So, and you're going to meet 3 big foreign diplomacy presidents, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. So we're going to talk about their various policies too. You can see here I have Theodore Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy. We'll elaborate more on that in a minute. So in 1901, McKinley was fatally shot by an anarchist named Leon Schoglitz, which you don't even know that. This put Vice President Roosevelt in charge at only 42 years old. So he's still, as of today, our youngest president. So he was not elected at 42. He became president at 42. And so as of today, he's still the youngest. JFK was elected at 43. But Teddy Roosevelt's still our youngest at 42 years old. His foreign policy reflected this idea of speak softly and carry a big stick. So Roosevelt's policy reflected an African proverb called speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far, which is basically the idea that you negotiate very gentlemanly-like, very orderly-like. You negotiate a treaty or a deal, and you have the threat of military force to back you up. So basically, it's kind of like intimidation, right? Like, I have all these weapons and guns behind me and this massive military that basically whatever I ask you to do, you're going to do it because I have this big military threat. So Roosevelt acted very aggressively, boldly, and decisively to make the U.S. a world power. And that's kind of Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy in a nutshell. It's a very aggressive foreign policy. We never attacked people. Like, we didn't go in and attack folks, but it was very, he used that threat of military force to get his way and get things accomplished the way he wanted to get accomplished. But as a result, made America much more prestigious and much more involved in foreign and international affairs as a result, too. So, the first thing we're going to look at is the Panama Canal. If you recall back in 1850s, us and the British had made a deal to build a canal in Central America at some point. Everybody remember the name of that was called? Yes? No? Maybe? Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850s? Maybe? No? Well, anyway, we wanted to honor that treaty. We still want to make the canal, but by this point, 50 years later, the British aren't as concerned about making the canal now through Central America as they once were. So Roosevelt developed a new treaty called the Hay-Ponce-Fote Treaty. You can see Hay as John Hay, and Ponce-Fote being the representative from Britain. They made a new treaty in 1901 which said that America can now build a canal on their own. So this Hay-Ponce-Fote Treaty allowed America to now build a canal on their own without any interference from the British. So the most logical place was Panama. Panama was the most narrowest strip of land between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, which is basically the connecting country of Central America and South America. But Panama was not a country at that time. Panama was actually owned and occupied by Colombia. Colombia is a country that attaches to Panama in South America. So there were Panamanians who lived inside of Panama, but they were actually owned and occupied by Colombians. And lo and behold, they didn't like Colombians. They wanted independence. So Roosevelt went down there, well, not himself, but he sent down representatives to negotiate a deal, to basically offer a deal to Colombia to allow them to dig in Panama to build a canal. Which, on a side note, this was actually the second attempt to build a canal. The French had tried to build a canal in the 1890s, and they failed to do so. So America's picking up from where they left off. And so they're asking Colombia for permission to do so. Basically, we're going to pay them rent to be able to use the land and be able to work there. And Panama said, no, we're not doing that. I'm sorry, Colombia said, no, we're not doing that, because basically they wanted an outrageous amount of money, and we said, no, we're not going to pay that much money. So they said, no, we're not going to let you dig then. So they wanted to offer, so they tried to offer a lot of, they wanted us to offer them a lot of money, and we just said no. So we know that Panama, or Roosevelt also knows that Panama wants their independence. So basically what happens then is that in 1903, Roosevelt will send a U.S. Navy ship to help support a revolt in Panama. So we don't fight. No Americans go on shore and fight, but basically we provide protective cover, or like a ship nearby. That way Colombia doesn't want to mess with Panama. So as soon as they arrive and show up, so it's basically Panamanians begin to revolt, and they're successful. And as soon as they overthrow the government in Panama, we immediately recognize them, which means now if Colombia tries to come back and reclaim Panama, we're going to be there to back it up. So they don't do it. So essentially, we help Panama become independent. That way we can help create a canal there. We never fired a shot, but we use our military as intimidation so Colombia wouldn't intervene. So a lot of Latin American countries were not happy with us after this happened, but, we had the military, they didn't, essentially. And now we're going to have much more control and influence over Panama. And because of that, you can say with me, Panama then becomes not a territory, but a protectorate, okay? So Panama is another protectorate of ours. So we're not going to own Panama, but we're going to run the canal zone. So from 1904 to 1914, it's going to take 10 years to finish the canal itself. And it's not just a straight canal. It's going to be a series of locks, which means that the water's going to be raised and lowered at various points. But basically, for 10 years, we're going to build this canal. This whole thing was sponsored by Roosevelt. In fact, he actually goes and visits it. He's the first sitting president to ever leave the country while being president, to oversee its construction for a few days. But it takes 10 years to complete. Hundreds of laborers die in the process, both Central Americans and Americans, mostly because of disease, as you probably will figure. So thousands will die because of disease. Measures were taken to reduce mosquitoes spreading yellow fever, but it still resulted in a lot of death. Most Americans approved of Roosevelt's tactics to build a canal, but not as much as how he got the canal. So they approved of how he was building the canal, but not how he got the canal. But either way, we still got it. And Latin Americans were resentful, but there's not much they could do about it. Eventually, Americans did feel bad about it. In 1921, Congress did vote to pay Colombia $25 million for its loss. But either way, 1914, the canal is finished. It opens, and we actually own the canal zone from 1914 until 2000. Like, we gave up ownership in 2000. But we didn't own Panama. We just ran the zone. And we actually, I don't have the exact numbers down here. We actually did pay Panama for the usage of land, and we pay them a yearly rent. I think we pay them like $250,000 every year for the rent of the land. But so we did pay them rent, but we ran the canal zone, which also means that any fees collected, we did the collecting as well too. So we'll stop video 1